Where is Turkey heading under Erdogan's third decade rule? How sustainable are Erdogan's unorthodox economic policies? How is Erdogan balancing domestic pressures with international commitments regarding the migration issues? I'm Nakhavali, and this is Middle East Analitika. Atilla, thank you very much for joining the program.
It's my pleasure. It's a very interesting project, and I would be more than happy to do my share to get this podcast disseminated through the social media space.
Thank you very much. As a first question, we know that Kılıçdaroğlu, prominent opposition, wanted to bring back democracy and independent institutions to Turkey, but also to build a constructive relationship with European Union. Erdogan, on the other hand, known for his conservative rule, won the election by a narrow margin, extending his dominance over Turkey into its third decade. So in your opinion, how has the Erdogan's approach to governance shifted over the past decade, particularly in terms of democratic freedoms, civil rights, and independent institutions? And where is Turkey heading under Erdogan's third decade of rule?
First of all, Kılıçdaroğlu has been the subject of massive criticism, not only obviously from AKP and MHP front, but also from his own wing, as well as from international experts. I think he had the best idea to reconstitute democracy. It needs to be done through a wide political front. And as far as CHP goes, it needs to go beyond its traditional Kemalist and social democratic constituencies to reach out to Turkish conservatives and Islamists. Conservatism, nationalism, Islamism are age-old trends in Turkey. They're not going to change much, and Turkey really needs to break through this ideological divide, and people should start voting on the basis of their economic interests. And I think Kılıçdaroğlu had the best idea to do that. It was probably poorly executed. His partners didn't subscribe to the project. Most importantly, I think his party has both the constituency and rank and file had serious concerns about what Kılıçdaroğlu was trying to do. So people just didn't go to the polls. To me, the day Mr. Erdogan won the presidential election is the day democracy died in Turkey. Local elections are still important. I don't think the opposition is going to be able to maintain its hold on major cities like Istanbul, Ankara, Izmir, Adana, Antalya, whatever. And this would simply formalize the de facto situation that Turkey is no longer a democracy, but an authoritarian regime. Mr. Erdogan, over the last 10 years, has become increasingly autocratic for two reasons. A, there is enough to make him paranoid and compel him to give up hope for democracy. If you want to, I can answer in detail what these events are. Secondly, I think this is his tendency, or perhaps human nature. Power doesn't like a vacuum. And when he eliminated all of his rivals and was faced by a fractured opposition, he simply expanded his power above and beyond. Again, I'm not a sociologist or psychologist, but it appears to me from what I see about Putin and Xi Jinping, these authoritarian leaders, eventually get infected by the God complex. They think they know best and no one else does. And they fill their advisors with yes-sayers and syncopaths. That's the stage where we are in. Though I must admit, Mr. Erdogan's U-turns in economic management and foreign policy U-turn are promising. I don't know if he's going to stay on that course, but something needs to be known to him and to anyone who watches or listens to this podcast. improving relations with the West is simply not possible without returning to the democracy. As importantly, probably a more obscure point, Turkey's economic development cannot proceed without reinstituting democratic institutions such as independent regulatory bodies or obviously an independent judiciary and free press. So while I have different opinions about Turkish economy in the short run, about foreign policy affairs, to me, as long as Mr. Erdogan is in power, there shall be no hope for democracy in Turkey.
Right. You mentioned economy, so let me ask you about economic challenges that Turkey faces. We know that Turkey is also suffering from the skyrocketing inflation rates. You're an economist, so let me ask you, how sustainable are Erdogan's unorthodox economic policies, and what impact might they have on the country's future economic stability?
I think heterodoxy, which was implemented through a new concoction called the new economy model, which essentially denied everything economics had thought us over the last 3 centuries, failed. The staff who executed the policy are now retired or sent into the greener pastures. Mr. Erdogan is now experimenting with traditional economic methods. This is why he appointed Mehmet Şimşek, Cevdet Yılmaz, the VP and central bank governor, prior Erdogan, of course. The problem is he still doesn't fully subscribe to the notions of traditional policy, such as really, if you have demand-side inflation, Turkey has, cost-push inflation, demand-side inflation, and inflationary expectations becoming completely on board. But obviously, if you are going to attack the problem, you're going to start with the demand side, which is the easiest. He doesn't quite accept the fact that you cannot bring down domestic demand to the extent of depressing inflation without introducing a recession. He is now more willing to allow traditional monetary policy tools such as higher interest rates to be used, but only to the extent these don't interfere with his longer-term goal of very strong growth. And obviously, this is unsustainable. Nevertheless, look, the guy can still be pragmatic, even though he's getting old and very set in his ways. The fact that he's giving Mehmet Şimşek a chance makes me slightly optimistic. If Mr. Mehmet Şimşek retains his post after the local elections, which are to be held in March 2024, he may persuade his master completely embrace orthodoxy and for Turkey to go back a monetary, fiscal, and incomes policy setting that's appropriate with very high levels of inflation. And then in 2025 or so, Turkey could finally deal with the inflation problem in the sense that it won't be reduced to the levels of modern or advanced economies, but there will be no expectation that it will ratchet up further. Again, I don't know if this is realistic at this point. Only time will tell.
Right. Again, economic-wise, another question, and that's we know that Erdogan has returned from his investment-raising tour in the Persian Gulf region. What significant economic agreements were reached between Turkey and the Persian Gulf countries during his recent visit? And in addition to economic support, what potential political implications could raise from the deepening relation between Turkey and Gulf cooperation countries?
I think it's better to start with the second part of the question because this is an area where politics drives economic integration. It's my understanding that, led by Saudi Arabia, the GCC countries want to form a new bloc between the West and the East to promote their own interests, as well as to show that there's a third way to the world. They clearly have financial resources to do so, but not the political heft. They don't have big armies, they don't have big populations, and they're really just the one-track economy, hydrocarbons. Now, Turkey complements that goal very well. We have a fairly solid defense industry, which can help them, access high technology weapons. Obviously, Turkey has a very strong army. And even though soft power has not been the strong suit of Mr. Erdogan, if he can be persuaded to do so, he can help Arab countries to extend their influence in a peaceful way in Caucasus and the Balkan region. Most importantly, there is huge complementarity between Arab and Turkish economies. They need everything we have, and we need everything they have. I mean, Turkey essentially should be number one trading partner for Saudi Arabia and the others, simply because we have a very diversified industrial base which focuses on consumer goods, cheap but very high quality consumer goods. And of course, we need their oil investments. So I think that relationship is more permanent. Mr. Erdogan doesn't have to sacrifice much to get along politically with Arab countries. For a while, I think he entertained aspirations to become the new Khalif, leader of the Sunni world, but that backfired very badly. He has quickly retraced his steps to aid Muslim Brotherhood and Hamas, and then that pleased the Arab countries. Political issues are not yet completely settled, but as I said, compared to what it would take for Mr. Erdogan to get on the good side of EU, sacrifices or the prices he needs to pay to be good friends or allies with Arab countries are extremely low. And that brings us to economic benefits. I think there is good desire and the wherewithal in these Arab countries to invest ever-increasing sums into Turkey, but they are no fools. Before they do so, they want to make sure Mr. Erdogan's erratic behavior and heterodox policies don't drive the country over the cliff. And I have my own suspicion that they may have a hand in the appointment of Mehmet Şimşek and Gaye Erkan. So perhaps at the end of this broadcast, it will become apparent that Mr. Erdogan's challenges and opportunities are all interwoven. And this is why it's so difficult. He cannot focus on a single track to achieve success. He needs to have his hands in all sorts of soups and needs to make adjustment to make sure that all of these events transpire in a way that delivers him to his final goal. So to attract the kind of capital, both in terms of FDI, also loans and direct financial aid, he needs to stabilize the economy, which, as you suggested, implies combating inflation, but also, as importantly, reducing current account deficit or improving financing thereof, and reducing Turkey's budget deficits. If he can make progress on those issues, which I don't think is going to happen before the end of the year, if it happens at all, I think the GCC will start with relatively large sums of direct financial aid through purchases of sukuk and perhaps loans to Exim Bank and the Turkish Central Bank. If Mr. Erdogan manages to stabilize the economy in a sustainable way, which we will see whether it's possible after local elections, then I think FDI will follow. The $50 billion strategic cooperation agreement signed with the UAE and Turkey could remain on the paper, or it could be actualized within 5 years. But honestly, Mr. Erdogan needs to set Turkey on the right economic path. At the end, it's a very promising development for both sides, and I think for the world in general. It's a peaceful cooperative venture, but to see whether it's going to have any kind of impact on the world, region, or Turkey will need to wait until the second half of 2024.
Right. But, when you mention GCC countries and, Arabs, then it comes to my mind that, these Arabs, they don't have the same ideology. You mentioned Muslim Brotherhood. We know that Turkey has a close relationship with Qatar. How do you think that Erdogan can overcome some of these ideological differences, let's say, between Qatar, Saudi Arabia. You said that the cooperation will take place with the UAE. Do you think that he can overcome these challenges?
Well, I have relatively exotic or contrarian ideas on Mr. Erdogan's ideological preferences. I don't necessarily think he's a true Islamist. I think he hates Jews and he hates the Western civilization. Otherwise, how could you explain his close cooperation with Serbia, Russia, and Iran, none of which are known for their love of Sunni Muslims? But let's give the guy credit. I think he tried for 10 years to export his, the Muslim Brotherhood brand of Muslim to the Arab world. It may have been effective at street level. This is why he is very popular with the Arab, citizens. But it cost him so much in terms of Syria, in terms of the complete cessation of trade and tenders in GCC countries, that I think he realized that's a dead end. At the other end, I think the Gulf monarchies are less concerned about the Muslim Brotherhood because of Sisi completely eradicating them militarily in Egypt, and then this strange gentleman, I keep forgetting his names, coming to power in Tunisia. It turned out that political Islam is not the energetic driving force that once the Western civilization and liberals have feared. It's an ideology that doesn't deliver any economic benefits and proposes to completely dispense with democracy. I don't think Arab or Turkish people want that to replace what they have right now. Hamas, Arabs never cared much about Palestine, to be perfectly honest with you. That's manifested in the Abraham Accord. So it's not a huge concern. Erdogan largely silenced the anti-Egyptian broadcasts in Turkey. Muslim Brotherhood and Hamas members remain in the country. There is not much that can be done about it, but I don't think that really concerns Arab countries. Overall, Arabs, the new generation of Arab leaders, Mohammed bin Salman, and he's old, but his accession to throne is new. The new gentleman who runs the United Arab Emirates are more pragmatic. They really don't care much about the Islamic ideology, but more in consolidating their power and delivering economic progress to their nations. And Mr. Erdogan fits that profile very well. There are still issues at the political level, though, that needs to be worked out. For instance, Libya. I really don't know what's happening in Libya. But it needs to be resolved. Turkey needs African markets, sub-Saharan markets, to expand its exports. But the way of doing that by renting or leasing bases, is it in Sudan? Once you go beyond the Sahara, I get lost here. So Mr. Erdogan needs to recalibrate his approach to African nations and really reduce military aid. Again, nothing is perfect. There is also the whole issue of how Mr. Erdogan is going to balance his close relationship with Tehran and Israel and Arab countries. But I think overall, when I think rationally, I see the relationship between GCC and Turkey as very promising in the sense it takes much less to deliver it. Or in other words, the cost-benefit ratio is highly favorable to benefits which are foreseeable and almost immediate.
Right. You mentioned Iran and Syria. So let me ask you about that. We know that there were many predictions that Erdogan is going to meet Bashar Assad. Assad himself said that he's not going to meet Erdogan up until Turkey is still in the north part of Syria. But still we can hear different signals from leaders, from analysts and academics. What direction, in your opinion, this event will take in the future?
Erdogan would dearly love to get rid of Syrian refugees in a peaceful way, because that has become number one or number two concern of the local population. But they don't want to go back, and if they do, Assad is going to slaughter a large number of them. Assad's demand that Turkish army and Turkish proxies withdraw from Syria is simply not feasible, not from a military perspective, but from a humanitarian angle. Idlib would then completely fall to Damascus forces, which means at least 1 million more position Syrians would flock to the Turkish border, along with God knows how many thousand really crazy jihadists, and they would destabilize Turkish economy and politics. Terror will raise its ugly head again. So there's a stalemate. As far as I can tell, there is nothing Turkey can do. Assad needs to be made to understand that the current situation in Syria is unsustainable. This could be through an economic collapse, or this could be, Turkey, the Kurds, and the United States putting more military pressure. It could be through Tehran regime collapsing. I'm not saying it will happen, but it's a very shaky regime. You're Putin losing the Ukraine war. Until then, probably the Syrian file is closed. There is a very slight hope that the rapprochement between Gulf countries and Assad would force him to rethink his hardline policies on Syrian war and perhaps accept an honorable peace. But I don't see him doing that really without concrete developments in that aspect.
Let's focus on migration issues now. We remember that was also an issue during the election. With increasing anti-migrant sentiment in Turkey due to socioeconomic burdens, how, in your opinion, is Erdogan balancing domestic pressures with international commitments, and what approach Erdogan has for dealing with migratory challenges in his third decade of rule?
He really doesn't. He thought allowing a large number of Syrian refugees into the country would be leverage against Assad. That backfired. Assad doesn't want the Sunnis back. He's an Alawite, closer to the Shiite faith, but definitely not Shiite. And now he's stuck with officially 4 million Syrian refugees. But just to explain the scope of the problem, the number of illegal migrants plus Africans who came with tourist visas but are actually migrant workers could be as high as 10 million. Now remember, Turkey's official population is 85 million, and all of these people that arrived in the last 10 years. This is such a huge sociological shock that no country can absorb it. So that's clearly a problem. Mr. Erdogan has no ways of dealing. I mean, if I were Turkey's leader, and if it was clear to me that Assad or Afghanistan is not going to take these people back, or they're not going to go back, I would immediately start spending on socially and economically integrating these people to the society, teaching their children the language, giving them job skills, etc. See if there are any useful skills among them to be absorbed by the workforce. None of this is done. So it's really an issue that's dealt with police and administrative measures. If people become a problem, you kick them out of their neighborhoods, you send them back to refugee camps. How should I put it? You force them to go back to Syrian territories under Turkish control voluntarily by building shady houses there. There are no jobs. But the strange thing is, the Syrian refugee problem has not increased support for the opposition, but for nationalists. Erdogan's ally, MHP, and, its endless offsprings. So really, from a political perspective, Erdogan is not going to do anything about the refugees, either in Syria or at home, unless both AKP and MHP start losing votes, and he realizes that his stronghold on power is in jeopardy.
Right. Attila, I have many more questions. If you agree, we can talk about them in the second part of this episode. Thank you so much for being part of the conversation.
Thank you.
Thank you very much for watching and listening to us. Please don't forget to subscribe.